Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to this live stream. I'm with the one and only, mashallah, Farid Responds.
Hello,
How you
Habibi.
doing?
Wa alaikum salam wa barakatuh. Akhi, pleasure to be here. Barakallah fiqh. I'm doing fine. I hope you're doing all right.
Alhamdulillah. So we're
Alhamdulillah.
going to be talking about something very close to both of our hearts, actually, which is the truthfulness of Islam. Because, obviously in polemics, in dawah, and all these types of things, there's a lot of arguments for and against Islam, which are being propagated, and then, counter arguments and counter arguments. But there's nothing more powerful than directly going to the Book of Allah and
Of
trying to
course.
show why it's the truth. So, fire away. What are we going to be talking about today?
Akhi, the thing is, subhanAllah, I'd like to believe, or I'd like to say, I have no doubts about this. There are two ways of proving that the Quran is a miracle of eloquence. There are many, many ways of proving that it has a miraculous nature. Through archaeological evidence, through matters that have to do with predictions and whatnot, through matters that have to do with the past that the Prophet ﷺ was not supposed to have access to. But when it comes to the eloquence of the Quran, that's the main miracle of the Quran. And there are two ways of approaching that. One is, well, first of all, before even going into that, the Quran is a miracle for all times. It's not a miracle of the past. It's not just a miracle during the time of Rasulullah. It continues onwards up until today.
Yeah.
And if we hold that belief, we naturally believe that we should have access to this miracle. And of course, a lot of us read the Quran and we're unable to see how it's a miracle of eloquence. For a lot of people, it's because not having access to the Arabic language. And to a lot of Arabs, it's because of lack of access to elements and tools that have to do with the topic of eloquence, balagha, grammar, and whatnot. Um, Now, that's one way of how can I say this? Investigating or examining the miracle of eloquence of the Quran or the eloquence of the Quran itself. However, a lot of people aren't going to do that, and it's an uphill battle, and there's a lot of time that you're supposed to put into that. So there's an easy way. There's an easy way, which is testimony. Okay,
Yeah.
and that's done by simply looking at um, how the Quran challenged the people of Quraysh and how Quraysh and the Arabs in general failed to produce something on par. That's simply it. Not only failed to produce something on par, but failed to produce anything. They didn't even attempt the challenge because of the nature of the Quran and due to the level of the Quran. It was something that people didn't want to challenge. So that's briefly the way I'd like to open this topic. If the Quran was just a miracle of the past, if that was the miracle that no one challenged the Quran, if that was the miracle, then the Quran is no different than um, Jesus raising the dead and Moses causing the sea to split.
Yeah.
However, again, we have access to it today. So those that really want to get serious about learning about that miracle, then you can learn it yourself by learning the language, getting deep into eloquence, learning the books of Abdul Qadir al-Jurjani, benefiting from his Zamakhshari's tafsir, and really getting deep into that. That's the way to do it. However,
Yeah.
we want to make things easy. Let's go into the past. Let's go into the history of the subject. Any thoughts so far?
Yeah, I mean, Alhamdulillah, a lot of people are watching. So, I mean, with the viewers, this live stream, if there's any questions which I see repeatedly coming up, because a lot of people obviously ask question and comment, then during your sort of explanation of the miracle, where I see fit, I'll just ask you to just pause
Okay.
and ask that
Okay.
question, because mashallah,
Sounds
already there's a lot of people who are buzzing with the in the comment section and
sure.
just going at it. So yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Okay. I'm hoping I can get through all of this today. I'm going to try to keep it brief because it really is a huge subject. But briefly, I'd like to start off by talking about the nature, the environment of 7th century Arabia and the importance of poetry. Because When you're discussing with a non-Muslim today and you say, "Oh, the Quran came with something really eloquent and no one attempted to challenge it," and they're like, "Okay, so what?" They don't get the significance of this. They don't understand um, the nature of the competitive nature of society and how big of a deal poetry is. So the thing is, Akhi, when a poet was born, not like literally born, but when he rises, when his poetry is at that level, and a tribe realizes, oh my God, we have a poet, and he's a force. This is, Yahi, it's a cause of celebration, and the reason is because your tribe can, its status can skyrocket, and any of your enemies, you can just like destroy them, not even by fighting, just with the poet. That's how insane it was, and I will provide certain specific examples of that. Perhaps the most famous example is there used to be the biggest beef in the history of poetry, perhaps, is what used to happen between Jarir and al-Farazdaq. And this is in the early days of yeah, in the first century of Islam, by the way. This isn't Jahiliyyah. However, of course, there stuff like this did happen in Jahiliyyah, perhaps not to this degree, but basically Jarir and Farazdaq used to go back and forth, attacking each other through poetry, and there was a third party who had nothing to do with it, who made it a part of his business, who happens to be Ar-Ra'i Numayri from the tribe of Bani Numayr. So Ar-Ra'i Numayri, what he did was he used to always side with Al-Farazdaq, and he used to go to Jarir, and he used to troll Jarir, and he used to say, oh, Farazdaq destroyed you, Farazdaq owned you, to a
Yeah.
degree. And what happened was Jarir basically said to Ar-Ra'i Numayri, listen, if you keep on doing this, I'm going to have to end it. And he kept on pushing it. So Jarir basically went home, wrote up 90 lines of poetry attacking Bani Numayr, and it is brutal. It is a brutal demolition, and basically, by the time his poetry spread, Numayr had to change its name. The tribe had to change its name from Bani Numayr to Bani Amr. Can you imagine
That's a
that
huge.
happening?
Yeah.
That's huge. Akhi, and
If you understand tribal customs, you would know that,
yes,
like,
yes, and it's like a vague name because there are many Amrs, many like Bani Amr can mean a lot of things, right? They chose like Amr, who's the father of Numayr, to kind of get away from this, Akhi, to get away from this. There's another example of this happening with Qais bin Amr, and he attacked Bani al-Ajlan, and that also caused them to change their name. And this was during the time of Umar bin Khattab, and they went up to Umar, and they complained to Umar, this guy is attacking us. He said this and that about us, and it was only after Hassan bin Thabit spoke about this and spoke about the destructive nature of what this poem just did to Bani Ajlan that it is said that the poet himself was imprisoned. Some said that he was actually lashed for doing this. It's a big deal. Umar also imprisoned, if I'm not mistaken, Al-Hutay'a, if I'm not mistaken, if that's how to pronounce his name. He imprisoned Al-Hutay'a because Al-Hutay'a used to just go on a warpath attacking everyone with poetry. It would like ruin lives, Akhi. He had to be imprisoned because of that. So that's just like a very brief idea of how significant poetry was. Okay, so that's one.
could I just
Please.
add? I mean, for contemporary people, the way I'd like to sort of contemporize this is, you know, uh, nowadays there's sometimes a debate and a certain things come out of a debate, like a sound bite. There's this famous debate online between a feminist and this other guy, and the feminist said, you know, women are stronger, they live longer, and all this type of stuff. And the guy replies back, well, when they're married to people like you, they just want to die, right? So it's just like he said that thing, and it just went viral all over the internet. And you'll find this on Reddit, you'll find it on Discord, you'll find it here. Somebody says something in reply in a conversation, and that thing, that statement, that slogan, that whatever you want to call it, it becomes more viral than any video, any tweet, or anything. It just becomes a sort of a movement in of itself, right? So,
Right.
for example, send me location.
Right. Right. Right.
Thing.
It's a good
So,
example.
when we're talking about poetry, we're not talking about some ancient tradition which is no longer, even today, the eloquence in a refutation, right? The eloquence in going back and forth, that will go away itself and it will just turn into something else. So that's what we're talking about here when we're talking about poetry. We're talking about something which is still very relevant, even though it's a different category, but it's the same thing.
I would like to emphasize that this stuff was memorized, and it is said that Ra'i Numairi, I think, if I'm not mistaken, he was going to Basra. By the time he got to Basra, his tribe was already there saying, "What have you done? What shame have you brought upon us by going against Jarir?" Like, it's that bad. It's that bad. Another example of the Arabs and their adoration of poetry is that they actually had something called Sajdat al-Sha'r, the prostration of poetry. In admiration of lines of poetry, they would actually make sujood.
Is that Jahiliyyah?
Example, yeah, this is jahili. It's a jahili practice, and it's
Wow.
something that even like some Muslims did in the very early years of Islam. I think Farazdak himself. People used to make sujood to the poetry of Labid, if I'm not mistaken, the poetry of the Rumma. Yeah, some major poets with some, especially like some lines. Like the Rumma has a very eloquent line about tears rolling down one's face, and it's said like it's the most beautiful line in poetry. You know, just the line itself. The rest of it isn't that good. It's just that specific line is that powerful, and some people used to make sujood for that because
Wow.
it was they found it so beautiful. Now keep in mind when Rasulullah SAW recited Surah Al-Najm in Quraysh, the people of Quraysh made sujood for that. It's just something to keep in mind.
Oh, very interesting. So
Yeah,
they had
yeah.
this previous
It
interesting.
was a practice. It was a practice.
This now it starts to make more sense. So it wasn't a sajda like in Islam we have the sajda. So they said, okay, we're submitting to Allah. It was from, is
The
that right?
beauty of the text. The beauty of the text itself.
No, but just to clarify,
Mhm.
because I don't know this. I mean, everybody knows that incident, but I thought
Yeah.
their reason for prostration was they were mimicking the Muslims. But what I've learned from you is actually they were mimicking a Jahili practice of sajda
Yeah.
when you have something really
And those
astounding.
lines, in other lines in poetry, when they actually do sujood for the sha'r, it's not it has nothing to do with praising gods or whatnot. It's about the beauty of the text itself. It's something that they admire so much that they actually prostrated to. That's something that actually happened. That's how important poetry was.
Yeah.
Another aspect of poetry and society's relationship with poetry is you had different forms of competition between the poets. So let me just, I want to check out some of the terms that I have here that I've collected here. So you have al-musajala, and al-musajala is when al-musajala is basically you have two poets that you have a judge who chooses a specific subject, and then you have two poets that basically try to come up with the best lines about that specific subject, and it has to be on the spot, and the judge has to judge between both poets. And excuse me, um, you have um, you have another form in which someone would come up with half a line of poetry and the other poet would have to continue the other half. You know, stuff they had like these different games, different types of competitions between poets. And that's the lighter form. So what I'm trying to say is by even mentioning this is Arabs were very competitive in nature when it came to poetry, and they had different types of poetry competitions in that sense in order to determine who is the better poet. And that's like the lighter form of this. The harsher form of this is poetry that occurred in wars. Poetry occurred when each tribe was attacking one another naturally. Um, that sort of thing. And you have examples. If you look in books of Sirah, you will find that the Muslims and the Kuffar of Quraysh, they used to go back and forth quite a bit. And there are like these rules, kind of, where they have to use the same rhythm, they have to use the same rhyme. So, and they stuck with this stuff. They stuck with these rules. They stuck with the same rhyme at the end. Let's say, like, the line ends with a ra or a ba or whatever. The person who's responding would respond with the same rhyme, basically. And they would do that not only in order to shoot the other tribe down, but our poetry is better than yours. Of course, that's something that is always a focus. So yeah, poetry was a huge aspect of their lives. And yet, when Rasulullah SAW came with the Quran, instead of refuting the Quran with their own lines, instead of coming up with a Quran like it, what they did was they attacked Rasulullah SAW with poetry. They attacked his poets with poetry. They attacked the Muslims with poetry. And they used to match the poetry of the Muslims back and forth. So Hassan bin Thabit would have some poems and he would attack the people of Quraysh with them. And the people of Quraysh, they would attack, the poets of Quraysh would attack Hassan bin Thabit and the Muslims with same structure, but they wouldn't do that with the Quran, which is really interesting. Why would they not attempt that with the Quran? In regards to Hassan bin Thabit, this is another aspect of the Arabs and their acceptance of Islam. Hassan bin Thabit was arguably the best poet of his time, arguably. And Hassan bin Thabit once was, if I'm not mistaken, he had one of those competitions, and Nabigha was the judge. Nabigha was one of the top two poets of all time. And Nabigha basically, judged for the other person, said that the other person, I can't recall who it was. If I recall correctly, I could be mistaken, but I think it was a female poet. And Nabigha said that the female poet was the better poet, and Hassan was furious. And he said, "I'm a better poet than you and your father." He said that to Nabigha. So this fiery Hassan bin Thabit could not believe that someone judged, or Nabigha judged the other person's poetry to be better. In any case, Hassan, when he heard of the Quran, when he heard of Islam, when he met Rasulullah, he accepted that these are the words of Allah. Why couldn't Hassan say, "Oh, I could do better. I write stuff like this all the time"? You had major poets like Labid, who is actually one of the poets of Al-Mu'allaqat, whose poetry used to be stuck on the Kaaba. He himself accepted Islam. After he accepted Islam, by the way, we don't have Islamic poetry by Labid. There's no more poetry by Labid. Labid stopped writing poetry, which is wild. And he's not the only one. I do have a couple of names here of others who did that. If you don't mind giving me a second. Malik bin Umair al-Sulami, Bashar bin Adi al-Ta'i, other poets who actually left poetry. And Labid actually says, "Why would I continue writing poetry after Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given me Al-Baqarah and Ali Imran?" It's insane what Quran did. These major poets just simply submitting instead of writing against the Quran. That's just an amazing fact.
Sorry to interrupt, but
Please.
there's one way of explaining this is if you look at a country like China, they have over 1 billion people, but in the World Cup, they hardly, play a significant role. Yet you have countries which are much, much smaller, like Belgium and others, right? Who Germany and also in terms of numbers, who are much better at football because they have a culture of football, right? It's not to do with the numbers; it's to do with the culture. The culture there is from a young age. It's about football. So you have to remember the Arab culture was a culture of poetry, right? So we're not just talking about, every culture has poetry, but there's some cultures in which poetry is so widespread and given such a high maqam, such a high status that it just produces a huge genre of subcultures about poetry and about poets and about leadership. And like you said, they're using poetry in war, which we would think is, I mean, who uses poetry in war? I mean, you do have war songs, I guess, lyrics and, going back and forth. But anyway, I think so far already what you've covered, Farid, is enough for a skeptic to basically come to two potential conclusions. The first is that either there is a mass conspiracy in which Muslim historians and Muslim armies came together, destroyed all of the Arabic literature, made up all these stories of poets giving up and the Quran becoming supreme, and you'd have to do some amazing intellectual gymnastics to try and prove that. Or
I have a
secondly,
response to that, but please go on.
yeah. And secondly, I mean, I think it's something that we can even just tell somebody, prove it, and they won't be able to do it. But the secondly, they'll have to say, well, clearly they submitted, and if they submitted, then that shows they acknowledge the Quran is superior, and it came from an unlettered man, right? Subhanallah, when you think about it, I mean, that's enough to establish the miracle of Islam.
I would like to add something very important to that. Very good points, Akhi. Aish in the report, it's an authentic report as well. I need to look up the source of this, but I do mention the source in the video I put up a while ago called "The Proofs of Prophethood" through Aisha. Aisha is asked what was the Prophet ﷺ's relationship with poetry, and she said he hated gatherings of poetry. He hated that. It's not his thing. And you don't find the Rasul like reciting poetry. It's not his thing. He didn't sit down write poetry. He didn't recite poetry. It just wasn't his thing. There's like one line, if I'm not mistaken, where that he recites. I can't recall who it was for, but he even butchered that. It was just not his thing, and he was corrected. He was corrected on that line, and they're like, oh, by the way, it's supposed to be like this, It was just not his thing, which is proof that how can someone, and of course another part of this is even the Sahaba, they said in the last year of Rasulullah's life, they said that Jibreel used to come to Rasulullah in each Ramadan, and the Quran would be recited twice in his last year. This shows that there's someone who's actually teaching him. You don't have to believe it's an angel, by the way. You don't have to believe it's an angel, but there is someone there who everyone accepts as a third party. He's not someone who's actually known in the city. They don't go like knocking at his door, but there's this third party who's actually there teaching him this stuff.
And there's clear times that we have historically where it was difficult for the Prophet ﷺ to try and respond to the disbelievers because he forgot to say inshallah and the revelations never came. And then there's this period of time where they were all like, okay, come on then, where's your answers? And then obviously it took, I think, close to a month or so, and then Allah revealed.
I can't recall. Yeah, so it's the Surah Al-Kahf, the matters that are mentioned in Surah Al-Kahf.
Yes.
That definitely deserves to be looked into. There's some other stuff I want to cover as well. How Quraysh reacted to the Quran. So yes, we do have a bunch of people accepting Islam. Another example is Unais al-Ghifari, who himself was a poet. This report is in Sahih Muslim. He used to be a poet, and when he heard the Quran itself, he said, I am familiar with the sayings of the soothsayers. I'm familiar with all sorts of poetry, and this poetry is, or these words are not the words of man, and he just accepts Islam due to that. And you have Jubair bin Mut'im, after hearing a surah, he says this is the first time I come across Islam, and I hear certain verses, and he said, when I heard these verses, my heart was going to fly. And in another variation of the report, he says, my heart cracked. The profound feelings that these people felt upon hearing the Quran for the first time. Now, an important thought is that needs to be emphasized is, or question, why don't we feel this today? It's for two reasons. One, again, access to the language, eloquence, and two, most importantly, it's because we're so familiar with the Quran. We're brought up. We're toddlers and we have our parents playing Quran and cassettes and whatnot. And
It's like growing up rich.
yeah,
Yeah.
you don't feel it. You don't feel it.
Yeah.
Exactly. Perfect. So in regards to Quraysh, how did they? What was their reaction? Um, Subhanallah, they used to be very, very harsh against the Muslims, and Muslims were forced to migrate. Early on, even Abu Bakr was forced to leave Mecca. And while he was on his way out, a head of a tribe saw him, and this was like 5 nights away from Mecca. He saw me. He's like, "Where are you going?" He says, "I'm leaving because I just want to worship my God in peace." And the leader of the tribe said, "A person like you cannot leave. A person like you must live in his land and must worship in peace, and I will not accept this." He takes him back to Mecca, and he gives him support, and and he says, "This is a person. Abu Bakr is someone who because Abu Bakr was from Taim, and Taim wasn't like the strongest of tribes. They
Yeah.
were a weak tribe, and that's why they actually had the ability of kicking Abu Bakr out. So it's also interesting how Islam broke through tribalism, and Abu Bakr himself became a caliph, which is another like topic for another time. But
Yeah.
yeah, at the time, Abu Bakr had to remain at home and worship at home, and Abu Bakr was kind of like pushing the boundaries. He built a little a little room in which he used to pray in, and I guess people had more access to it. I don't know through I'm not sure how exactly, but apparently had people had more access to his voice through that other room. Could be through windows. I'm not sure, or maybe it was open. Wallahu alam. In any case, um, women and children used to flock to hear him, and Quraysh had to send for the tribe leader again, and they said, "This man is causing a fitna. He's corrupting, or he's going to corrupt our women and children." That's amazing, Akhi. That's amazing how words can do that to you. It's not just the meanings of the words, but the words themselves, the structure of the words. Because the meanings that are found in the Quran can also be found, a lot of the meanings of the Quran can be found in earlier books, in the Old Testament, New Testament. However, it's the eloquence of the Quran that makes it stand out. Another example is, and this is ajib, how Quraysh reacted when they heard the Quran, and what they did to stop the Quran from spreading. Um, the verse says, وقال الذين كفروا لا تسمعوا لهذا القرآن والغوا فيه لعلكم تغلبون. The unbelievers say, listen not to this Quran, but talk at random in the midst of its reading, that ye may gain the upper hand. Quran 41:26. So they would just try to distract people by whistling, by clapping, by speaking aloud in order to cause people to not hear what Rasulullah is saying. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine that Rasulullah is in front of the Kaaba and he's reciting Quran, and you have people randomly clapping or whistling or just making sounds in order to distract people away from him? Can you imagine that? It suggests that these words had a profound effect on people, and people were just trying to suppress this in any way by making noise. And the Quran, subhanAllah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala captures their actions and immortalizes these actions in words. And we recite them now. And Rasulullah recited them at the time. And another verse, لا تجهر بصلاتك ولا تخافت بها. Neither speak aloud in prayer, nor
Yeah.
speak it in a low tone, but seek a middle course between. And the reason is because when he used to speak aloud, um, Quraysh, the people of Quraysh, used to curse and cuss at the Quran as a reaction. Who does that?
Yeah.
Who does that? And the reason is because, again, these words are so profound. The sentence structure, the eloquence, its effect on people was so profound. We need to just disparage this speech, disparage this message, cause people to be distracted away from this. And subhanAllah, like Ibn Abbas says, Quraysh used to curse the Quran upon hearing it. So the Prophet ﷺ was ordered not to recite loudly, which would cause them to curse the Quran, or too softly, for that would prevent people from listening. It's in Sahih Bukhari.
Okay.
Um,
So sorry, just before you continue,
please.
there's one particular question which I think is important, and we sort of touched upon it before, but I think it's worth going over.
Sure.
So Rustam is asking, how relevant is it to use mostly Muslim sources for the proof? For Muslims, it might be fine, but usually it does not work in a conversation with a non-Muslim. Now, I can attest to the fact that that's not true. Yeah, it does work with non-Muslims, but the point still is there that we're using mostly Muslim sources here.
Okay.
But
Good,
what's
good
what's
choice.
wrong with that? That's what I want you to sort of try and address.
Well, firstly, in regards to the last couple of examples that I mentioned from the Quran, yes, the Quran is a Muslim source, in a sense. But and the reason, because it's not written by a Muslim. The Quran is not a work that's authored by a Muslim. It's Allah's book. But the thing is, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala captures their reaction, when He captures their reaction of cursing the Quran, when He captures their reaction of making sounds in order to prevent people from listening to the Quran, um, when He captures these reactions, this in itself is proof that it happened, because the Quran is a living text. It's something that's recited. And if these things didn't happen, then um, people would just simply say, "This never happened.
Yeah.
We never cussed at the Quran. We never tried to suppress the Quran in this way." Um, and there's another verse which is very significant. Um, Basically, Al-Walid bin Mughira, who is the father of Khalid bin Walid, who is one of the heads of Quraysh, upon hearing the Quran, thinks about it, tries to come up with a solution. The Quran immortalizes his words, in which he says, "This is magic." The Walid bin Mughira refers to the Quran as magic. And there are multiple verses of the Quran in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala captures the kuffar referring to the Quran as magic. Now, if this wasn't said, the Muslims and the kuffar alike would simply come out and say, "Okay, um, we never said that." And that would be it, khalas. No more Islam, no more Islam. Muhammad lied, and that's it.
Yeah.
So sometimes the Quran itself and Muslim sources can actually are very, this, some of the stuff, especially the Quran being a living text, sets it apart from other sources. But in regards to the subject of, or in regards to the claim that we're making, the main claim we're making here is nothing, no works were ever written that were made to refute the Quran or to challenge the Quran. This is something that, this is something that cannot be disproven, because there is nothing. Now,
Yeah.
what people, because we will say, "Tayyib, the burden of proof is upon you. Bring a text that matched the Quran." And Muhammad ﷺ was unable to challenge that, or his challenge was met. There's nothing. Someone may say, maybe, as you said, Sabur, what if someone says there was a massive conspiracy to suppress this?
Yep.
The reason why that's impossible is you're speaking about the same people that documented everything. They documented everything that kuffar use against Islam today.
That's
They don't.
I mean, that cannot be overstated. The
Yeah,
point you
yeah,
made there.
yeah. Yeah, every argument that's used against Islam today, was documented by our hadith narrators, our scholars of tafsir, and that's like they have all that ammo because we preserved it. The
But there's
least,
also, yeah, but
yeah,
I just want you to add, there's also something else. You see the Arab Christians who are significant in number, and you also had other what's the name of the Arab tribe that was Christian, that was the Ghassan tribe,
okay,
right?
yeah, yeah,
So, you have these roots from which they could say, well, this is what the Muslims are up to. Because remember, it wasn't like the international state of affairs at the time is everybody was in silos. The Romans were looking at the Muslims, the Persians were looking at the Muslims. Like you do, you look for internal dissenters. The history of the pagan Arabs pre-Islam is a non-Islamic source. It's again one of those
right,
things.
right,
Also, I just want to just highlight something. You know, there are things in our recorded history, such as with the Prophet ﷺ, he falls off a horse, right, or something else, which would be embarrassing from a
mm,
megalomaniac point of view, from a
right,
narcissistic point of
right,
view. But those
right,
things are recorded, right?
right,
Also, something which is very common in the world today is to show off your wealth and this type of stuff. And the Prophet ﷺ lived a very humble life. And in the ancient world, if you came across as humble, no one took you seriously. So even his behavior didn't fit, the expectations of the pagan Arabs. So there's loads of ways we can refute this.
subhanallah, subhanallah. Um, yeah, man, there's so much to say about the subject. I really enjoy digging deep into this, researching this. Um, this point itself about Quraysh referring to the Quran as magic.
Hmm.
And yeah, what's really surprising to me is you have non-Muslims today, sometimes ex-Muslims, saying stuff like, "Oh, the Quran is just an ordinary book. I could have written something like this," or things of that nature. And you had these major poets that accepted the Quran, and kuffar referring to the Quran as magic. What is this? What could it mean? What is this about? And inshallah, yani inshallah, uh, I hope people look into this more, and I hope people open their hearts. And I'm not saying, guys, go learn eloquence. I'm not saying this to a non-Muslim, because that's it's not easy. It's not easy. It takes a lot of time. But just open yourself to this idea. Open yourself to the idea that, um, this question of why didn't they attempt to go against the Quran and come up with something like it. And by the way, I dislike using the word inimitable, because the word inimitable suggests, imitate,
Yep.
copy,
Yep.
and that's not what the Quran is saying. That's not the challenge. The challenge isn't to copy. If you copy something, you lose. What you're supposed to do is you're supposed to do the same thing that the Arabs did when they had their wars and they used to write poetry against one another. Come up with something on the same style, with the same style. You know, have the verses end in the same, with the same letter and the same rhyme, something like that. Come with something on the same level. That's it. That's it. And most of the times when I see people challenging the Quran, a lot of the times it's not even people who know Arabic, but what they do is they just take some verses, jumble them up, put them in different orders, or quote a verse completely and change a single word. That in itself is referred to as plagiarism by the Arabs. And when you plagiarize something, you simply lose,
Yeah.
and you're called out for it.
Yeah. And also, what you do is you it's kind of like this. If I tell you, Farid, here's something, I just want you to keep it to yourself, right?
Right,
And don't tell anybody about it. I go to someone else, I say the same thing. Go to someone else and say, over time, it's out of the bag, right? And that thing
right,
is just gone out there. So if there's this mass conspiracy, okay, guys, what we're going to do is we're going to just rewrite the entire Arabian history. I mean, there's certain facts which are non-Muslim, sorry, non-Islamic, which are just facts. They
yeah,
had a culture of poetry. The Quran came to challenge that, and the Quran is something that was accepted en masse by the Arabs. Okay, just these three facts. These facts have nothing to do with Islam. These are just facts, right? Culture, the challenge, and the conclusion. These three alone, you can use these three non-Islamic facts to infer the same conclusions that you're inferring now. The only difference is all the details and all those types of things. Yes, we get them from Islam, but even these three facts alone are sufficient to basically just establish the miracle of Islam.
Good point. Good point. As you said, you see this stuff about um, the Arabs and their care and the significance of poetry and their culture. This isn't stuff that some Muslims came up in order to give the Quran more weight. There's no motivation for recording these reports apart from these reports being there and reflecting their society and reflecting their environment. So it's a stretch to assume that everything that can be used as evidence for Islam is a fabrication by someone. It's just unreasonable. History doesn't work like that.
Yeah. And also, normally what happens is, I mean, if someone does want to make this claim and they do want us to take them seriously, then this counterfactual, right, alone is enough. And this is that if this was true, that Muslims did this, right, then you have to you have to say kudos. You have not kudos. We have to say, well done to the Muslims, because we would be the only civilization in history that managed to successfully rewrite something without being discovered by future historians. Because what you find is Egyptologists, when they're studying certain things, they'll say this is the narrative that the pharaohs were pushing out in this particular era. However, you can see they're whitewashing their history because we also have these reasons. And you find this throughout. You find this about the Romans and the Persians. You'll find, historians saying, well, this is what the rulers were pushing out. This is how they write, or how they got rid of all of their manuscripts, and this is what's left over. So they'll uncover all of these things to the point that political murders, I've forgotten the name of the Egyptian pharaoh who was actually supposedly killed, right? Even who killed him, the whitewashing that happened afterwards, everything is uncovered. Where's the evidence? I mean, these Orientalists, they attack Islam using its sources, but no Orientalist can seriously uncover all of this city underneath the surface that would be hidden in terms of the cover-up. There's literally nothing. In fact, I mean, of all the people I know and all the people that I'm sure you've been reading and other people are reading, no one's bothered to make that argument because there's literally no evidence for it.
The crazy, like the only things I can hear that can kind of be used against this are like revisionist theories that say that the Quran was written 100 years later, or stuff like that. That people and even academia would not take seriously.
Yeah. And even when they make these types of arguments, the Quran came 100 years later, or even the Prophet ﷺ was not a real historical figure.
Yeah.
That's fine, but all we need to do is not respond, simply ask them, fine, substantiate that. Because if we go by your extreme skepticism here, we could say the exact same thing about Napoleon, about Genghis Khan, about Alexander the Great. We could say these people are myths, right? They don't actually exist. I remember a few years ago listening to William Lane Craig talking about this, and he's obviously said some really not true things about Islam. He's definitely not a friend of Islam. But anyway, when he was on this podcast with this other Christian commentator, and they were talking about this, he actually said, look, I believe Muhammad was a real historical figure, Sallam, right? So he even, regardless of all these arguments, eventually you have to concede certain points. He was a real historical figure. Well, if he was a real historical figure, and he did manage to challenge the culture, and I want everybody to understand something, culture is something that the most brutal dictators in the world cannot challenge, right? This is very interesting. So, for example, the Spanish went over to Latin America and they colonized it, but they couldn't change the culture of the Latinos, the Hispanic people. Likewise, you have the British who ruled India for hundreds of years, but they couldn't change their culture. They couldn't change sati and they couldn't change all these types of things that they actually had. Likewise, when you had Alexander the Great who went to Persia, in fact, he started mimicking their culture rather than changing their culture. Now, in terms of the Arab civilization, it wasn't a civilization before Islam, but the Arab population before Islam, there were a few things there that were cultural norms. Love of wealth and the love of people of wealth, right? So they had this materialism. Two, the hedonistic lifestyle of womanizing and drinking and this type of thing. Tribalism, the idea that the tribe, I'm going to fight and die for the tribe, whether they're right or they're wrong. Now, as somebody who's from a tribal background, like we're from the Abbasid tribe, right? It's settled in northern India, but now northern Pakistan. I know, and even though the tribal life is still far because I'm not there physically, but when you go to those areas and you see, okay, this is how they interact. Imagine the tribal systems and how sacred, supposedly sacred they're supposed to be. Right. And then on top of that, then racism, right? This thing about, okay, these people are inferior to this. So now you start to have all of these things, and in comes along a man, and this man basically challenges all of these societal norms, these cultural norms. You know, hedonism challenges it, materialism challenges it, tribalism challenges it, racism challenges it, and replaces all of these taghut with the worship of the creator and us being selfless in terms of our behavior. Which, by the way, when I gave an analogy about this a few years ago, about 3 years ago or 2 years ago, there was this incident between India and Pakistan. Now, India and Pakistan are both very nationalistic countries. You see a lot of the flags flying around and you see these types of things. I gave the example when I was in Pakistan that imagine somebody holding the flag of Pakistan, right, in New Delhi, the capital of India, during the height of the crisis when the Indian planes were shot down by the Pakistani pilots. Yeah. Now, by the way, just as a caveat, I'm not nationalistic at all. I'm just giving an example, right? However, if the person was to raise the Pakistani flag in New Delhi, they'd be killed, they'd be butchered, they'd be slaughtered, right? Because everybody loved India. Even the most secular liberals who normally criticize BJP and Modi and these, even they would be like, no, we need to unite. And it's a natural thing that psychologists speak about, the in-group, out-group thing, that in-group competition. So in-group cooperation is directly linked to out-group hatred. So kindness and altruism and empathy and ethics and morals and all of these things are the products of hating someone else. You got to hate someone else. So you have the Prophet ﷺ raising the flag of Tawheed in the land of Shirk on his own, and he does it brazenly and he's successful. Right? That itself, I mean, what more evidence do you need? If the message of the Quran was in line with Lat and Uzza and Manat and these being worshipped and then Allah being the supreme creator and these are intercessors, then I can see somebody trying to make the argument that, you know, there's nothing special about the Islamic phenomena. No, there's something very special about the Islamic phenomena because, like I said before, cultures don't change. They don't change. Yet when it comes to the Islamic culture and how Islam reformed the Arabs, that is something phenomenal. And now when Islam, and this is very interesting, again, I'm not being racist here. I'm from the Indian subcontinent. The Indian subcontinent is very materialistic, right? People wear, I mean, they have this thing that when you get married, you have to give gold, and there's a lot of focus on money. There's a lot of focus on wealth. There's a lot of focus on status. So in India today, in Pakistan, Bangladesh, all of these countries which are part of the Indian subcontinent, there's a massive thing about wealth, right? And a huge sort of focus on saving and this type of stuff. Yet Islam came and these Indian people were reformed. They gave up their culture, which is why what you find is that, you know, Islam and Islam's focus on sadaqah and Islam's focus on these things Whereas in Hinduism, you have this type of philosophy with the idols and these types of things, where people even started worshipping money. They have these idols that they go to because they want more money, or some of these idols are made of gold. Which, as an interesting fact, when the Muslim invaders came in from the north, they actually used to raid the temples, smash up the gold idols and take them back, because that's how much they love wealth. But Islam has this amazing power of cultural transformation, which even Chairman Mao and Xi Jinping and all these people, they can't even change the Chinese culture, even with all their brutal technologies, even with AI, even with, they have this social credit system in China where they can see people and their actions and they can give them credits. Yeah, they still can't change culture. Yet Islam, and a man in the desert 1400 years ago, he changed the world culture, not just the culture of one civilization.
Barakallah feek, man. Beautiful points. I would like to add, when you mentioned that he did it alone, that's a very important point, because he alienated everyone. Yes. With his message. He didn't like say, okay, we're cool with the Christians. He said, oh, by the way, you're worshiping the wrong God.
It's boring.
He went against everyone. And the same thing was carried, the same message, all that was carried by Abu Bakr. When Hurub al-Ridda occurred, and that was quelled, they're like, okay, Abu Bakr, now what? You still have these two nations, that are there, and they're like, and at our doorsteps. And it's like, we spread Islam, against both at the same time. It's not normal. It's not like, let's go build an alliance with the Romans and then slowly,
what's amazing about this? Sorry to interrupt, but there's something amazing about this. When the Prophet ﷺ was looking for help, and he was in Makkah, and he was going around to the different tribes and different people, and he actually came across a tribe which I believe was close to the Persians, right? And this particular tribe, he was with Abu Bakr, and he was there, and he again asked for support from somebody. This is before the support came from from Medina. Now, what happened was, he actually asked this tribe again and these people for support, and they actually agreed. A lot of people don't know this, because we only have a superfluous understanding of the seerah. Sadly, we don't look into it in depth. And what actually happened was, these people could have been
the Ansar.
The Ansar, right? They could have been the what we remember as Medina, and their cities and their villages. That's where the Prophet ﷺ would have been buried. And so they basically said, we will give you complete support, military support, political support, shelter. We will fight. We will do everything. We'll give you everything. But our support is not unconditional. It is conditional that once you are successful, and once Islam is established and all of these things and our support, when you die, then the leadership goes to us, right? Now, that's from a very Machiavellian point of view. That's a very sweet deal, right? So you basically get everything you want. When you pass away, they're going to be still upon Islam. But what did the Prophet ﷺ do? Islam is complete submission. So they had one thing they did not want to submit on, and he rejected them. Until the people of Medina came, who gave unconditional support. What does that go to show you? It sometimes also goes to show you, bro, that, Farid, I'm sure you realize sometimes in life, when you're coming across these Muslim liberals who are dumbifying Islam, liberalizing Islam, they're trying to sell out on certain points. I can see, both of us, I'm sure we can appreciate that. Okay, I know what you're trying to do. You're trying to make Islam more palatable. But what we learned from the Prophet ﷺ is, he's taught us Islam is binary. It's one or zero, right? It's either you accept total submission or you don't. So even if you're trying to make Islam, trying to make it acceptable by getting rid of one condition or one particular thing, in essence, you're not really calling to Islam, because Islam is unconditional surrender. Right? That's the point. It's unconditional surrender. And it's like this: either you go in all or you don't. There is no middle path in Islam. We worship a bit of Uzza, a bit of Allah. No, it's just either
Yeah.
Islam or not Islam.
I'd like to comment on something that you've mentioned about how the Ansar allowed the Rasulullah ﷺ to, I mean, how they support him in that sense. So they didn't just help someone that was having issues with his tribe, but they made him their leader. They brought him into town.
Oh, sorry.
Causing, yeah.
Sorry, I just completely forgot. I'm supposed to be live on another channel right now. I completely lost track of time. So I think what we're going to need to do is, if you complete your point, I'm just going to move over.
Right.
I can't believe it. I'm supposed to be like, I was having so much fun. I lost track of time.
Are they live right now?
Well, they're waiting for me because I'm the host.
Oh, snap. Okay.
So please complete your point.
All right, I'll keep it brief. So not only did the people of Medina allow Rasulullah ﷺ to enter Medina and to give him support, they made him their leader. Okay. And not only that, but they brought with him the wrath of the Arabs as a whole. They were going to be decimated by everyone. That's Al-Ahzab, was the tribes gathering against the people of Medina, coming together just against Islam and to end Islam. And most importantly, well, how to tie it with our discussion right here, these were two tribes, Al-Aws wal-Khazraj, two tribes with bitter history, warfare, and poetry against one another, having poets on both sides accepting Muhammad ﷺ and the Quran being from God, and accepting that they cannot challenge this book, and they allow this man to lead them. And I'd like to end it with that.
Absolutely. And I think definitely we need to continue this session, because I really think that we're now into the territory of churning out one after another similar arguments, but all arguments to establish Islam as being, true, because these things are just so hard to try and refute. So Jazakallah khair for joining us, Farid.
Thanks for having me.
SC Dawah, I'm going live, guys, with Hamza Sotsis. We're going to be speaking about atheism or Islam. What makes you happy, right? So obviously, it's not going to be atheism. May Allah bless you. Any last point you want to add?
I'm good. I don't want to keep you from the guys.
Absolutely. Jazakallah khair for that.